November 10th, 1943. The Rechlin Test Center, 70 miles north of Berlin. Hans-Werner Lerche's gloved hands moved across unfamiliar controls as he sat in the cockpit of the most peculiar fighter aircraft he had ever examined. The massive American machine dwarfed every single-engine fighter on the airfield. Its 8 wing-mounted machine guns, each bore half an inch wide, represented more firepower than an entire German fighter squadron carried collectively. Lerche was Luftwaffe's principal test pilot, a man who had flown over 120 different aircraft types during his career. He understood aerodynamics, understood engineering, understood what made aircraft lethal. But the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt sitting beneath him violated every principle of German fighter design philosophy. It weighed 17,500 pounds, fully loaded. A Messerschmitt Bf 109G weighed 6,940 pounds. The American fighter was fighting with 2.5 times the weight of a Messer. Yet intelligence reports from the front painted a terrifying picture. These massive machines were systematically destroying Luftwaffe fighters in air combat, then proceeding to obliterate everything that moved on the ground. Locomotives, trucks, tanks, entire armoured columns, vanishing under concentrated fire from those 8 machine guns. The numbers seemed impossible. From D-Day until the end of the war, Thunderbolt pilots would claim 86,000 railroad cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armoured vehicles, 68,000 trucks. Lerche had captured this particular P-47, serial number 42-22490, after Lieutenant William Roach mistakenly landed at a German airfield in France, thinking he had reached southern England. The Americans had designated it Beetle. The Germans designated it a problem that needed understanding immediately. As Lerche started the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, 18 cylinders, producing over 2,000 horsepower. He understood that this moment represented more than a test flight. This was an examination of American industrial philosophy, American tactical thinking, and American willingness to break every rule of fighter design that Europe had spent 4 years perfecting. What the Luftwaffe discovered when they tore apart this captured Thunderbolt would shock German engineers and change how they understood American air power. The 850 caliber machine guns were just the beginning. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The confusion had started weeks earlier, when the P-47 first appeared in combat over Europe. On March 10, 1943, the 4th Fighter Group flew the Thunderbolt's first combat mission, a sweep over France. The mission failed due to radio malfunctions, but Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilots who observed the new American fighters filed reports that circulated through intelligence headquarters with increasing urgency. Hauptmann Wilhelm Herget, an experienced fighter leader with 57 confirmed victories, wrote words that would be repeated in countless German combat reports over the next 2 years. The American machine appears impossibly large for a single-engine fighter. Intelligence suggests it weighs over 7 tons, fully loaded. This violates every principle of fighter design we have developed. Either our intelligence is mistaken, or the Americans have achieved something we believed impossible. The intelligence was not mistaken. German fighter doctrine, refined through 4 years of combat across Europe, North Africa, and Russia, emphasized one fundamental principle above all others. Weight was the enemy. Maneuverability came from light airframes. Turn performance determined victory. Every kilogram added to a fighter reduced its combat effectiveness. The Luftwaffe had perfected this doctrine through countless engagements. Their fighters were lean, efficient, precisely engineered machines optimized for dogfighting. The Focke-Wulf 190A model weighed 8,770 pounds. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G weighed 6,940 pounds. Both aircraft had been designed with one goal: maximize agility, minimize weight, dominate through superior turning performance and climb rate. German test pilots could put a 109 into a turn so tight that Allied pilots watching would swear the aircraft violated physics. Then the Americans arrived with a fighter that weighed more than some twin-engine bombers and proceeded to dominate the sky through sheer power and firepower. The philosophical clash was complete. Germany had built refined precision instruments. America had built a 7-ton hammer. After radio problems were resolved, combat operations resumed on April 8, 1943. The first major engagement came a week later on April 15th, when Major Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group scored the Thunderbolts' first aerial victory against a Focke-Wulf 190. That same day, multiple units encountered German fighters with results that shocked experienced Luftwaffe pilots. Oberleutnant Johannes Naumann led his Focke-Wulf squadron against what appeared to be easy targets. The P-47s looked clumsy and ponderous in formation, like transport aircraft more than fighters. He ordered his unit to attack from above, using the classic slashing attack that had destroyed countless Allied fighters. What happened next was documented in both American and German combat reports, and it would become the pattern for every major air battle over Europe for the next 2 years. As German fighters dove, the P-47s didn't attempt to turn away. They didn't try to dogfight. They dove with the attackers, accelerating past them, then pulled up into vertical climbs the Focke-Wulfs couldn't match. When the German fighters leveled off, struggling to maintain speed, the Thunderbolts were above them again, diving. 8 50 caliber machine guns hammering. 4 German pilots died in 6 minutes. The Americans achieved multiple victories without loss. Naumann, who had been flying combat missions since 1939 and held 23 confirmed victories, wrote words in his combat report that captured the fundamental problem facing the Luftwaffe. The new American machine defies all principles of aerodynamic design. Aircraft this heavy should not fight effectively. Yet it destroyed 4 of our FW-190s in 6 minutes without loss. They fight by different rules entirely. Our tactics prove ineffective. They refuse to turn, refuse to dogfight. They dive, climb, use speed and power exclusively. Our aircraft cannot match their tactics. Shock multiplied through spring and summer 1943 as more Thunderbolt groups became operational. German pilots encountered an aircraft that refused to play by established rules. Lieutenant Heinz Nocker, who would survive the war with 33 victories, recorded his first Thunderbolt encounter on May 4th. We attacked from an advantageous position with altitude and sun. The Americans saw us and went into a dive. We followed at maximum speed. At 700 kilometers per hour, they were still pulling away from us. We abandoned the chase. This should be aerodynamically impossible. It wasn't impossible. The P-47's thick wing and carefully designed airframe allowed dive speeds exceeding 550 miles per hour. German fighters reached structural limits around 470 miles per hour. In a dive, the Thunderbolt was untouchable. Luftwaffe pilots learned quickly that diving away from Thunderbolts meant certain death. The Americans would simply follow, accelerating to speeds that would tear German wings off, then pull out effortlessly while their prey disintegrated. The captured P-47 arrived at Rechlin in November 1943, and German engineers immediately began the most thorough examination of an enemy fighter attempted during the entire war. What they discovered when they disassembled the aircraft, measured every component, tested every system, and analyzed every design decision, revealed an American approach to air warfare that was simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. The armament system was examined first because it represented the most immediate threat to Luftwaffe operations. 8 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, staggered to allow feeding from side-by-side ammunition boxes. Each gun fed from a box containing 350 rounds. Total ammunition capacity, 2,800 rounds. Combined rate of fire, approximately 100 rounds per second. German armament engineers had never seen anything like this concentration of heavy machine gun fire in a single-engine fighter. Soviet engineers, who also examined a P-47 through Lend-Lease deliveries, wrote in their technical reports that they appreciated the high production standards and rational design, well suited to mass production, and the high reliability of the hard-hitting Browning machine guns. The ballistics were what shocked German technical personnel. Each 50 caliber armor-piercing round weighed approximately 1.7 ounces and left the muzzle at 2,850 feet per second. Kinetic energy at impact, over 13,000 foot-pounds per round. The armor-piercing ammunition designated for the Browning M2 was required by American specifications to completely perforate .875 inches of hardened steel armor plate at 100 yards and .75 inches at 547 yards. This meant that a 1-second burst from all 8 guns sent over 100 rounds at the target, each round capable of penetrating nearly an inch of hardened steel at combat ranges. German aircraft used aluminum construction with minimal armor protection. A Messerschmitt 109 had armor plate behind the pilot's seat, armor glass in the windscreen, and that was essentially the extent of protection. The rest of the aircraft was thin aluminum that 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds punched through like tissue paper. Obergefreiter Oskar Romm, an Eastern Front veteran with 92 victories, transferred to France in June 1943. His first encounter with P-47s left him genuinely shaken, and he wrote to his family about an experience that would be repeated thousands of times over the next 2 years. "I have survived Russian fighters and British Spitfires. I have been hit by ground fire dozens of times. Nothing prepared me for the American guns. They don't hit your aircraft, they destroy it completely. I watched a Messerschmitt literally disintegrate, one moment flying, next moment scattered pieces. The American fired for perhaps 2 seconds. The psychological impact of this firepower cannot be overstated. German pilots were accustomed to being hit, being damaged, nursing crippled aircraft back to base. The 50 caliber concentration eliminated that possibility. If a Thunderbolt got a solid burst into a German fighter, that fighter was finished, not damaged. Finished. Pilots reported seeing aircraft literally torn apart in mid-air, wings separating, fuselages breaking in half, explosions as fuel tanks ignited from incendiary rounds. When German engineers tested the Browning M2 guns removed from the captured P-47, they fired test bursts at captured Soviet tanks to understand penetration capability. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched completely through the side armor of 34 tanks at 300 yards. This was ground armor, significantly thicker than anything on an aircraft. The implications were immediately clear. No Luftwaffe fighter could withstand this firepower. None. The ammunition composition added another layer of lethality. American 50 caliber belts typically mixed armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer rounds. The armor-piercing rounds penetrated, the incendiary rounds ignited fuel and hydraulic fluid. The tracers allowed pilots to observe their fire and adjust aim. German pilots reported that P-47 fire looked like solid streams of light, tracers so dense that pilots couldn't see individual rounds, just continuous rivers of fire. Luftwaffe intelligence officers examining combat film from gun cameras on captured aircraft saw something that explained the impossible kill rates American pilots were achieving. The Thunderbolt's gun harmonization, the point where all 8 guns converged their fire, was typically set at 300 yards. At that range, all 100 rounds per second concentrated into a killing area, approximately 6 feet in diameter. A German fighter hit by this concentration of fire simply ceased to exist as a functional aircraft. Control surfaces severed, fuel tanks exploded, engines shattered, pilots killed instantly. The Americans had created an aerial buzzsaw that didn't damage enemy aircraft so much as it erased them. But the firepower was only part of the equation that German engineers at Rechlin struggled to understand. The durability of the P-47 represented an equally troubling problem for Luftwaffe tactical doctrine. Everything about the aircraft's construction demonstrated American willingness to trade elegance for survival. to accept weight penalties in exchange for pilots coming home alive. The engine was the centerpiece of this philosophy. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine weighed 2,360 pounds by itself, more than the empty weight of many pre-war fighters. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, air-cooled, producing 2,000 horsepower at military power settings and up to 2,800 horsepower with water injection emergency boost. German engineers were intimately familiar with liquid-cooled inline engines like the DB605 that powered the Messerschmitt 109. These engines offered excellent performance and relatively lightweight, but they had a critical vulnerability. The liquid cooling system used glycol coolant circulated through radiators. A single bullet hole in a coolant line or radiator meant the engine would overheat within minutes and seize. Pilots had approximately 5 minutes to find somewhere to land before their engine destroyed itself. The R2800 had no such vulnerability. Air-cooled radial engines could sustain tremendous damage and continue running. Cylinders could be shot out completely, and the engine would keep producing power on the remaining cylinders. Cooling fins could be destroyed, and the massive surface area of the radial configuration meant enough cooling remained. Oil lines could be severed, and the engine would run dry until catastrophic failure, giving pilots crucial extra minutes to reach friendly territory. Lieutenant Walter Schuck, who would end the war with 206 victories, shot a P-47 with his 30mm cannon over Frankfurt in November 1943. He filed a combat report that perfectly captured German frustration with Thunderbolt durability. I observed strikes on the cowling, wing root, and fuselage. Any German fighter would have exploded or gone down immediately. The American aircraft shuddered, maintained flight, then dove away at full power. I pursued for 3 minutes before abandoning the chase. It was still flying when I lost visual contact. American damage reports later found in archives showed that particular P-47 had taken 37 hits from 20mm and 30mm cannon fire and returned safely to England with all major systems functioning. The pilot reported rough engine operation and some control difficulty, but made a normal landing. Maintenance crews patched the holes, replaced damaged components, and the aircraft flew another mission 3 days later. The aircraft's size, which German pilots mocked as evidence of American engineering incompetence, actually provided crucial redundancy and spacing. Critical systems had backup runs. Fuel tanks were self-sealing, using rubber bladders that swelled when punctured to close holes. Control cables had alternate routing. The massive radial engine served as effective armor protecting the pilot, absorbing hits that would have killed pilots in liquid-cooled fighters where bullets passed straight through to the cockpit. But it was when German engineers began testing the armament system against ground targets that they truly understood what the Americans had created. The 850 caliber machine guns weren't just designed for air combat. They were designed to destroy anything on the battlefield. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Starting in December 1943, P-47s increasingly flew fighter-bomber missions carrying up to 2,500 pounds of bombs or 10 5-inch rockets. But even without external ordnance, the 8 machine guns alone were devastating against ground targets. German ground forces learned to fear the sound of the R2800 engine more than they feared Allied artillery. Panzerpionier Karl Fuchs, a tank commander who survived the Normandy campaign, wrote in his diary about a P-47 attack on his column in June 1944. The entry captures the helplessness German soldiers felt when Thunderbolts appeared overhead. 8 of them came out of the clouds with bombs and rockets. One pass destroyed 9 vehicles. They returned with machine guns and destroyed another 6 vehicles, killing perhaps 30 men. The entire attack lasted 3 minutes. We were helpless. The 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds could penetrate the thin top armor of German half-tracks, armored cars, and even light tanks. More importantly, they could destroy unarmored vehicles with devastating efficiency. Trucks, staff cars, supply vehicles, fuel tankers, all were vulnerable. A single Thunderbolt making one strafing pass could destroy an entire convoy. Locomotives became priority targets because destroying them meant supply lines collapsed. The 50 caliber rounds could penetrate a locomotive's boiler at combat ranges. Pilots would line up on the railroad track, fire a burst into the locomotive from 1,000 yards out, and watch it explode in a cloud of steam. The locomotive destroyed, the train stopped, blocking the line until it could be cleared. Often Thunderbolts would return to strafe the stopped train, destroying cargo and killing crews. From D-Day on June 6, 1944, until VE Day on May 8, 1945, P-47 pilots claimed 9,000 locomotives destroyed. That number seems impossible until you understand the tactics and firepower involved. A single locomotive represented a critical link in the German supply chain. Destroyed, it meant supplies didn't reach the front, reinforcements couldn't move, wounded couldn't be evacuated. The claimed destruction of 86,000 railroad cars over the same period represented systematic interdiction of German logistics. Each destroyed railcar meant ammunition not delivered, food not reaching troops, equipment not moving to threatened sectors. The cumulative effect strangled German military capability more effectively than strategic bombing of factories. The 68,000 trucks destroyed represented mobile warfare capability eliminated. German armoured divisions depended on truck columns for fuel, ammunition, and supplies. Thunderbolts would catch these columns on roads, often in terrain where vehicles couldn't disperse. 8 aircraft with 8 machine guns each could destroy 50 vehicles in minutes. The 405th Fighter Group hit a trapped German column near Roncy on July 29, 1944, during Operation Cobra. Ground investigations after the attack found 66 tanks, 204 vehicles, and 11 guns destroyed in less than 7 hours of repeated attacks. The 6,000 armoured vehicles destroyed included tanks, self-propelled guns, and armoured personnel carriers. While 50 caliber rounds couldn't penetrate front armour on heavy tanks like the Panther or Tiger, they could destroy external equipment, optics, and weapons. More importantly, they could penetrate lighter vehicles and the thin top armour of many German tanks. Armour-piercing incendiary rounds hitting fuel, tanks, or ammunition storage caused catastrophic explosions. But it was the systematic nature of these attacks that broke German tactical capability. Luftwaffe fighters might shoot down a Thunderbolt occasionally, but they couldn't prevent the attacks. The Americans had too many aircraft, too much fuel, too many pilots. Every day, weather permitting, Thunderbolts ranged across occupied Europe, destroying anything that moved. Oberst Joseph Priller, Commodore of Jagdgeschwader 26 and eventual 101 Victory Ace, wrote in his post-war memoir about the impossibility of protecting ground forces from P-47 attacks. The passage reveals the tactical hopelessness German commanders faced by mid-1944. We maintained fighter cover over our own airfields. The Americans would send 4 aircraft. 2 engaged our fighters. 2 attacked the airfield, destroyed parked aircraft, damaged runways. By the time we disengaged, they were gone. This happened daily. We could not prevent it. We could not retaliate effectively. We could only watch our capability erode mission by mission. The German examination of the captured Thunderbolt at Rechlin revealed engineering decisions that explained this dominance. American designers had built redundancy and reliability into every system. The hydraulic system had dual pumps. The electrical system had backup generators. The fuel system had multiple tanks with cross-feed capability. The aircraft could lose significant systems and continue fighting. Hans Werner Lurch's test flights in the captured P-47 provided data that German engineers found simultaneously impressive and depressing. The aircraft handled poorly at low speeds, exactly as predicted for something so heavy. Control forces were high, requiring genuine muscle to maneuver aggressively. Turn performance was mediocre compared to German fighters. Everything confirmed that American pilots who tried to dogfight were making a fatal mistake. But when Lurch pushed the throttle forward and dove the Thunderbolt from altitude, everything changed. The aircraft accelerated with shocking rapidity for its weight. At high speeds, the control surfaces stiffened but remained effective. The dive brakes worked exactly as designed, allowing controlled descents that would have overstressed German fighters. And the zoom climb capability, converting speed back into altitude, gave the Thunderbolt energy management advantages that negated every turning disadvantage. Lurch's report to Luftwaffe headquarters concluded with words that summarized the fundamental problem. The Americans have built an aircraft optimized for their tactical doctrine rather than for our concept of air combat. In the combat regime, they have chosen high altitude, high speed, slashing attacks with overwhelming firepower. The P-47 is nearly ideal. Our fighters are optimized for close-in maneuvering combat. When the Americans refuse to fight that way, our advantages become irrelevant. German engineers examined the manufacturing techniques visible in the captured aircraft with particular interest. The Thunderbolt showed evidence of mass production techniques that Germany couldn't match. Standardized components, modular construction, simplified assembly procedures. The Americans were building these 7-ton monsters faster than Germany could build Messerschmitts. Republic Aviation's production facilities at Farmingdale, New York and Evansville, Indiana, delivered over 600 Thunderbolts monthly at peak production. This single type represented more fighters than Germany's entire production of all types during comparable periods. German engineers who examined production data obtained through intelligence sources understood the industrial implications immediately. Every P-47 destroyed in combat was replaced within days. Every German fighter destroyed represented an increasingly irreplaceable loss. America could sustain attrition, warfare indefinitely. Germany couldn't. The mathematics of industrial warfare favored the side that could outproduce its enemy while maintaining quality, and the Thunderbolt represented the American ability to do exactly that. The armament installation on the captured aircraft revealed sophisticated engineering that German technicians grudgingly respected. The 8 Browning M2 machine guns were mounted in the wings, with careful attention to accessibility and maintainability. Each gun could be removed and replaced by ground crew in under 20 minutes. Ammunition feed systems were designed for reliability under high-G maneuvering. Spent cartridge ejection was routed to avoid jamming mechanisms. German fighter armament philosophy had evolved toward fewer, more powerful weapons. The Messerschmitt 109 G6 carried one 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub and two 13mm machine guns above the engine. Total firepower was theoretically devastating, but practical rate of fire was much lower than the Thunderbolt's 850s. The cannon carried only 150 rounds. The machine guns carried 300 rounds each. A pilot had perhaps 10 seconds of sustained firing time before running out of ammunition. The P-47 pilot had approximately 35 seconds of sustained fire from all 8 guns. But more importantly, the high rate of fire meant that even brief trigger pulls delivered sufficient rounds for kills. A 1-second burst sent over 100 rounds at the target. Most pilots never held the trigger more than 2 or 3 seconds, because anything hit by that much .50 caliber fire was destroyed. The reliability of the Browning M2 particularly impressed German armourers. The German MG 151 20mm cannon was an excellent weapon, but it was mechanically complex and prone to stoppages under combat conditions. Cold weather affected reliability. High-G manoeuvring sometimes caused feeding problems. Maintenance requirements were significant. The Browning M2 was a simple blowback-operated machine gun with a reputation for nearly perfect reliability. It functioned in extreme cold, extreme heat, and under violent manoeuvring. Stoppages were rare. When they occurred, the design allowed pilots to cycle the charging handle and clear the jam in flight. American pilots reported gun stoppages so infrequently that most never experienced one during their entire combat tour. This reliability meant American pilots could commit to attacks with confidence their weapons would function. German pilots always carried some doubt. Would the cannon fire? Would all three guns function? That psychological difference, knowing your weapons were absolutely reliable versus wondering if they might fail, affected combat aggression and effectiveness. The Germans also examined the gun sight system on the captured Thunderbolt. The N3B reflector gun sight projected an illuminated reticle onto a glass plate in front of the pilot. The system was simple, rugged, and effective. It accounted for bullet drop and lead, but required pilot judgment for range estimation. German pilots used similar systems, so this wasn't revolutionary. What impressed examiners was the production quality and standardization. Every sight was identical, calibrated precisely, built to tight tolerances. Luftwaffe equipment suffered from variation between individual units. Quality control declined as the war progressed, and production was dispersed to avoid bombing. Some gun sights were excellent, others mediocre. American equipment showed consistent high quality, regardless of production date or facility. This spoke to industrial capacity and quality management that Germany couldn't replicate under wartime conditions. But beyond the technical examination, the captured P-47 represented something that troubled German military leadership deeply. It represented the American willingness to invest resources in equipment that kept pilots alive. The Germans had built efficient killing machines optimized for performance within resource constraints. The Americans had built survivable weapons platforms optimized for pilot survival and sustained operations. A Messerschmitt 109 cost approximately 50,000 Reichsmarks to produce. A P-47 cost approximately $85,000, roughly 340,000 Reichsmarks at official exchange rates. The American fighter cost nearly 7 times as much to build, but it brought pilots home alive. It could sustain damage that would destroy German fighters. It could be maintained by moderately skilled ground crew. It was designed for the reality of combat, not the theory of aerodynamic purity. German pilot training by mid-1944 had declined to dangerous levels. New pilots arrived at combat units with as little as 150 hours of total flight time, including their training. They faced American pilots with 700 hours of training before reaching England, then additional hours in theatre before flying combat missions. The experience differential was catastrophic. When these inexperienced German pilots encountered P-47s, the results were predictable. Hauptmann Heinz Baer, eventual 220 victory ace, intercepted B-17 bombers over Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943. His combat report described Thunderbolts appearing just as his Messerschmitt unit began their attack run. 8 American fighters dove through our formation. First pass destroyed 3 aircraft. We scattered and attempted to reform. They returned and destroyed 2 more. The bombers continued unmolested to target. We lost 5 fighters without shooting down a single bomber. The new pilots never had a chance. The Americans came too fast, hit too hard. It was slaughter. This pattern repeated across every major air battle from late 1943 onward. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 2,800 fighters in the West during the 6 months following D-Day on June 6, 1944. P-47 groups claimed roughly 1,000 of these victories. The 56th Fighter Group alone destroyed 674 German aircraft during the war, becoming the top-scoring American fighter group in Europe. These numbers translated into irreplaceable losses of experienced pilots. A veteran pilot represented an investment of years of training and hundreds of hours of combat experience. Once killed, that experience was gone forever. New pilots couldn't replace veteran capability. They just died faster, taking their minimal experience with them. Lieutenant Heinz Noak's diary entries from spring 1944 document the psychological collapse of Luftwaffe fighter units. The entries are stark, almost mechanical, recording losses that accumulated beyond sustainable levels. April 8th. Lost. 3 pilots today to Thunderbolts. They were experienced men. The Americans didn't even slow down. April 22nd. 5 more pilots gone. We shot down 1 American. He bailed out safely. Ours are dead. May 3rd. I don't know how much longer I can continue. We're losing the air war. Every mission, more friends don't return. The Americans come in greater numbers every day. The ground attack missions inflicted unique psychological trauma on German forces, precisely because of the 850 caliber machine guns. Unlike level bombers that could be predicted and intercepted, P-47s appeared without warning, struck with precision, and vanished before effective response. The concentration of firepower meant that everything they hit was destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. German supply officers kept detailed records of equipment losses to air attack. From January through June 1944, before the Normandy invasion even began, Luftwaffe records show fighter-bomber attacks, primarily P-47s and P-51s, destroyed more rolling stock and vehicles than strategic bombing of transportation networks. The tactical interdiction proved more effective than strategic bombing for cutting supply lines. Every destroyed locomotive created a bottleneck. Trains backed up behind the wreckage. Supplies didn't move forward. Clearing the destroyed equipment required specialized railway repair crews that were themselves targets for follow-up attacks. The Germans couldn't simply bypass destroyed locomotives because rail networks had limited capacity. Every blocked line represented critical capacity lost. The destruction of trucks eliminated flexible transportation capability. As railway networks degraded under constant attack, German logistics became increasingly dependent on road transport. But roads were death traps. Thunderbolts could see vehicle convoys from miles away. They would attack without warning, systematically destroying every vehicle. Drivers learned to space vehicles far apart and avoid daylight movement when possible, but this reduced transport efficiency dramatically. Oberstleutnant Johannes Steinhoff, eventual 176 Victory Ace and post-war Luftwaffe commander, analyzed American tactical superiority in a 1946 interview. His assessment captured why German fighters couldn't effectively counter the Thunderbolt threat despite superior turning performance and comparable pilot skill. They fought as a system, not as individuals. Radio discipline, standardized procedures, mutual support. Their pilots were good, their aircraft was excellent, but their system was unbeatable. When we attacked their bombers, Thunderbolts dove on us from above. When we tried to engage the Thunderbolts, they simply climbed away or dove away. We couldn't force combat on our terms. They dictated every engagement. The tactical innovations, developed by P-47 units, became textbook examples of maximizing aircraft strengths while avoiding weaknesses. The Zemke fan formation, named after Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group, positioned fighters in a descending spiral. The highest element maintained altitude advantage. Lower elements covered different altitude bands. German fighter controllers tried to counter these tactics, but found themselves overwhelmed by American numbers and coordination. By summer 1944, the 8th Air Force could put over 1,000 fighters in the air simultaneously, all equipped with VHF radio, all coordinated by ground controllers using radar, all following standardized tactics developed through 2 years of combat experience. The Luftwaffe couldn't match this capability. Radio equipment was often unreliable or in short supply. Ground control networks were degraded by bombing and Allied advances. Tactical standardization suffered as units were constantly reorganized due to losses. Individual German pilots might be excellent, but the system they operated within was collapsing under accumulated pressure. The human cost of facing P-47s appeared in German casualty statistics that tell a story of systematic attrition. Of approximately 28,000 Luftwaffe aircrew killed during the war, roughly 8,000 died in the West from 1943 onward. P-47s accounted for substantial portions of these casualties, both in air combat and ground attack missions that killed pilots at their bases. Oberst Gordon Golob, eventual 150 victory ace, lost 17 pilots from his group to P-47s in 3 months from March through May 1944. His report to Luftwaffe headquarters bordered on desperation, revealing how unit commanders understood they were fighting an unwinnable attrition battle. "We cannot replace these losses. Training new pilots takes 6 months minimum. We're losing experienced men weekly. The Americans replace their losses immediately. Pilot quality declines daily. This cannot be sustained. Request immediate reinforcement and priority for experienced pilots from other theatres." The reinforcements never came in sufficient numbers. The experienced pilots from other theatres were desperately needed wherever they were. Training couldn't produce pilots fast enough to replace losses. The Luftwaffe fighter force in the West effectively ceased functioning as an organised defensive capability by October 1944. Scattered units still operated, individual aces still scored victories, but systematic fighter defence had collapsed. Allied bombers ranged across Germany at will. P-47s strafed targets from treetop level, destroying anything that moved. The 850 caliber machine guns that German engineers had examined with such interest at Rechlin were now obliterating the Third Reich's ability to sustain military operations. The final indignity came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. The Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte on January 1, 1945, throwing nearly 900 fighters against Allied airfields in a desperate attempt to regain air superiority. German fighters destroyed approximately 150 Allied aircraft on the ground, but lost 237 of their own aircraft and 214 pilots, including 18 formation leaders and senior commanders. P-47 groups played crucial roles in defeating this operation. The 56th Fighter Group intercepted German formations returning from their attacks, destroying over 30 aircraft in a single day. The 55th Fighter Group caught another formation low on fuel and decimated it. The Germans had gambled their remaining strength on one massive strike. They lost the gamble. The Luftwaffe never recovered. Major Heinz Baer, one of the few Luftwaffe aces to survive the war with over 200 victories, reflected on the P-47's impact in a 1948 interview. His words captured both respect and bitterness that characterized German pilot attitudes toward the Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt represented everything we weren't. We built refined machines requiring skilled pilots. They built a brute that average pilots could fly effectively. We emphasized elegance and maneuverability. They emphasized power and durability. We designed fighters to win dogfights. They designed fighters to win wars. History proved them right. The production numbers illustrated American industrial might in ways German planners found incomprehensible. Republic Aviation built 15,683 Thunderbolts between 1941 and 1945. At peak production in 1944, Republic's plants delivered over 600 aircraft monthly. This single type represented more fighters than Germany's entire production of all fighter types during the same period. German aircraft production peaked at approximately 40,000 aircraft of all types in 1944, but this number included bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, transports, and trainers alongside fighters. Single-engine fighter production was approximately 25,500 aircraft. The Americans built 15,683 P-47s alone, plus thousands of P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings, and earlier model P-40 Warhawks. German pilots knew these numbers. They understood the mathematics of attrition. Every Thunderbolt destroyed was replaced within days. Every German fighter destroyed represented loss that couldn't be made good. The Americans could trade losses indefinitely. The Germans couldn't. Industrial capacity determined outcomes more than pilot skill or aircraft performance. Post-war analysis revealed that P-47s flew 546,000 combat sorties in Europe, more than any other Allied fighter type. They destroyed 3,752 German aircraft in air combat. They destroyed another 3,000 aircraft on the ground. But the ground attack statistics told the story of why Germany lost the war in the West. 132,000 tons of bombs dropped. 135 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition fired, 86,000 railroad cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 6,000 armored vehicles destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed. Each destroyed locomotive meant supplies not delivered. Each destroyed truck meant troops not reinforced. Each destroyed aircraft meant one less defender. The cumulative effect strangled German military capability. German engineer Kurt Tank, designer of the Focke-Wulf 190, examined a captured P-47 in early 1945 when Allied armies were already deep inside Germany. His assessment, preserved in post-war documents, acknowledged American engineering achievement while revealing German philosophical differences about fighter design. They built an aircraft we would never design. Too heavy, too large, too complex by our standards. We prized efficiency, minimum weight, maximum performance per kilogram. Yet it worked magnificently in combat. They understood that absolute performance mattered less than combat effectiveness, that firepower and durability could substitute for maneuverability, that industrial capacity meant they could afford weight we couldn't. The 8 machine guns represented American willingness to brute force problems we tried to solve elegantly. The Thunderbolt's influence extended beyond its combat record into post-war fighter design philosophy. American aircraft design after 1945 consistently prioritized power over finesse, durability over lightness, systems redundancy over minimalism, and range over point performance. These principles became fundamental to American air combat doctrine. The 15 Eagle, developed 30 years after World War II ended, embodied Thunderbolt philosophy in supersonic form. Heavy compared to Soviet fighters, emphasizing power and weapons over turning performance, designed for energy tactics and standoff missile combat rather than close-in dogfighting. The 15 never lost an air combat engagement. The doctrinal lessons from the P-47 proved timeless. For German pilots who survived the war, the P-47 remained a source of respect mixed with bitterness. They had flown courageously in inferior aircraft against overwhelming opposition. Those who survived carried memories of an aircraft they couldn't defeat, designed by an enemy they had underestimated, representing industrial capacity they couldn't match. The hatred wasn't personal. German pilots respected their American opponents as fellow aviators. The hatred was professional, directed at an aircraft that nullified German tactical doctrine, survived damage that should have been lethal, delivered firepower that destroyed everything it hit, and appeared in numbers that made victory impossible. Hauptmann Walter Dahl, who commanded Jagdgeschwader 3 and survived the war with 128 victories, wrote in his memoir that the P-47 represented the moment the Luftwaffe lost the initiative in the West. His analysis captured the fundamental shift in air combat that the Thunderbolt created. We could no longer dictate terms of engagement. If the Americans wanted combat, they fought on their terms, high-altitude diving attacks with overwhelming firepower. If they chose to disengage, they simply climbed away or dove away. We couldn't follow. Then they would attack our ground forces, our supply lines, our airfields. We couldn't stop them. We couldn't protect our own forces. The 8 machine guns destroyed not just our aircraft, but our ability to fight effectively. The final flights of P-47s in Europe came in May 1945, escorting reconnaissance missions over a defeated Germany. The aircraft that had terrorized the Luftwaffe for 2 years flew over silent airfields, destroyed cities, and surrendered armies. The war they had helped win was finished. Their legend was just beginning. The 850 caliber Browning machine guns that shocked German engineers when they examined the captured Thunderbolt at Rechlin had destroyed 9,000 locomotives, 68,000 trucks, 6,000 armoured vehicles, and 86,000 railroad cars. They had killed thousands of German soldiers, destroyed irreplaceable equipment, and systematically dismantled Germany's ability to sustain military operations. Those 8 guns represented American industrial philosophy applied to warfare: overwhelming force, absolute reliability, sustainable production, and willingness to invest resources, equipment that worked. Germany had built elegant fighters optimized for aerodynamic efficiency and maneuverability. America had built a 7-ton hammer with 8 machine guns and used it to beat Germany into submission. The P-47 Thunderbolt proved that wars are won not by the most elegant weapon but by the most effective weapon employed by the most capable system. American production capacity, tactical doctrine, pilot training, maintenance capability, and strategic vision combined to create air dominance that Germany couldn't counter with courage or skill alone. German pilots possessed both courage and skill in abundance. They lacked the industrial base, the resources, the tactical flexibility, and ultimately the aircraft to counter American air power effectively. The 850 caliber machine guns mounted in the P-47's wings became symbols of American military might, instruments that destroyed not just German aircraft but German capability to continue fighting. When German engineers at Rechlin examined that captured Thunderbolt in November 1943, they saw the future. They saw an aircraft that violated their principles, contradicted their theories, and represented an approach to warfare they couldn't match. They saw 8 machine guns that would systematically destroy everything Germany needed to fight. They saw defeat built into an aircraft that weighed 7 tons and refused to fight by established rules. They were looking at the weapon that would help end the Third Reich. They just didn't know they were already too late to stop it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.